So, Jeff, let me ask you, how much cash do you have in your wallet right now? Or how about this? How much do you have in your bank accounts right now? Actually, okay, you know what? Just tell me your net worth. What's your net worth?
I don't think I can tell you that, but I will say there is a theory that floats around with the students, and because at some point one of them Googled my name, and it said something. I Googled my name, net worth, and at some point they saw something about it. That I was a net worth of $5 million. So I can't confirm or deny the validity of that, but there is a theory out there that I have $5 million. So do with that what you will.
Well, okay, here's what I will do with that.
Okay.
Because I'm asking because I need to know if you are, in fact, too wealthy.
Too wealthy.
And I would say if your net worth is indeed $5 million, I know you're not confirming that, but if that's the case, then yeah, I think you're too wealthy.
I guess we'll just have to talk about that. But that is the discussion today. How wealthy is too rich? Is there such a thing as too rich? And where is that line? We're going to talk about that today on Deepish Thoughts. All right, well, welcome to Deepish Thoughts. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Jamie. We're going to talk about that issue of, is there such a thing as being too wealthy, or is it bad to be rich? What does rich even mean? Where do we draw that line? Jeff, it seems like there is a perception, at least among some in our society, that wealth is a bad thing, or that wealthy people are bad people. Where do you think that perception comes from?
Yeah, I think you're right that there is definitely that perception. It's kind of common, right? Like I feel like it's just this commonplace idea that like wealth, this day and age is kind of like this bad thing. Like you want to like, oh, you shouldn't be wealthy. There's kind of this resentment. I think a lot of times it comes from jealousy though. That would be my guess, Jealousy in combination with maybe like a resentment. I think a lot of people I think a lot of people see the needs that they have or the struggles that they have financially, and they're just like, man, I want some of that wealth. And why don't they share it with me? So I think there's a lot of like self-centeredness at the core of how people feel about wealth, I'm not wealthy, therefore wealth must be bad. You know what I mean?
So there's maybe an envy.
I think so.
To it.
I think that's a big piece of it, which is our natural tendency, right? We want what we don't have. And so, I may or may not have $5 million, and so you may or may not be envious of that.
Right.
So it makes sense because we want what we don't have. That's pretty normal, right? I mean, for people.
It's human nature, I think, if we're honest with ourselves. I feel like another thing that people commonly think is that if somebody's especially wealthy, they probably came by that through some dishonest means, through some maybe crooked means.
Yeah.
It's almost like we assume that that's the case. And of course, in some cases, that's very true.
Yeah.
Right? But we maybe some people tend to assume that that's what happened in every case of someone being wealthy.
But why would people think that? Because like to me that seems weird, right? Like is it that we don't know the people who are wealthy and therefore we feel like, because I feel like the people that I know who say are better off, right? Who have more money, I don't feel like they're unkind people. They tend to be really kind, really nice people, just kind of just like everybody else. But it still feels like there is that perception. It's weird to me.
Maybe there's a lot of movies and stuff where the villain is a corrupt, rich person, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
So I don't know where this stereotype came from, but it does seem like it's there somehow.
Yeah. It also could be that I know a lot of people have issues with corporations, and right, like they work for a corporation and they're frustrated by how they're treated at their job. Right. And maybe they feel like they're being taken advantage of or they're not being paid enough. And so they feel like, oh, well, there's this corporation and it's mega wealthy. Why don't we get more of that? Right. They're profiting. Why am I not getting more? Do you think that's part of it too?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I've worked, in corporations like, you don't know the CEOs or the VIPs at that corporation. And so it does feel like you're kind of slaving away for somebody else to profit from it. In a way, how accurate that is, I don't know, but it can feel that way.
Yeah.
And when you don't know the people then it's easy to look down on them, I suppose.
That's true. And I think that's kind of cultural, right? Like when we don't know, yeah, you're right. When we don't know somebody, it's kind of like when we're on the internet, just engaging with somebody on social media, for example. We've talked about this. It's easier to criticize because we don't actually know them. So it's easier to kind of like be negative about them or say mean things to
That's
them.
right. Yeah, we're just criticizing a
Like an
name.
idea.
Yeah, it's not even an actual person in our minds.
Yeah. Yeah, which is too bad because I think a lot of people who are wealthy actually are pretty, I think are often generous, right? You know, but it's funny, like if say somebody has like $10 billion, right? Just as an example, even if they give like $1 billion away for that's a lot of money. That's a ton of money. But for some people, I don't think that'd be enough. Like, I don't think that would be generous enough.
So we're evaluating somebody else's generosity and deciding if they're generous enough.
Right, which, I don't know. That seems a little bit presumptuous. But I think that's where it gets to the question. Like, I think we kind of, at some point, we draw the line where it's like they go from just like, hey, they're just a normal person to now they're wealthy. Where do you think that line, I don't know, where do you think that line exists for people? Is it like at $1 million? Is it at $10 million? Is it, oh, you could cover a $1,500 emergency expense, and so you're rich? Like, where's wealthy? Because that's kind of abstract, isn't it? Like, kind of all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. How do we even define what wealthy is? Yeah, it seems like maybe this is a little cynical, a little critical, but I'm just going to say it.
Go for it.
It seems like for a lot of people, somebody who's wealthy, like in a negative way, is somebody who has more than I do, right? Like the amount of money that I have is it's not bad. In fact, I should probably have more than I do. But then you get beyond that, and then it's like probably too wealthy.
Okay, so even if somebody's just making a little more than you, it's like, oh, they're too wealthy?
Or quite a bit more. I don't know. Yeah. I don't think anybody, I've never heard anybody say, yeah, you know what? I am too wealthy. This isn't right.
Yeah.
It's always somebody else who has more than they do, right?
Yeah. Which gets back to that like comparison, right? There's a comparison that happens with wealth. It's like, I have less. You're right, that it's never people saying that they have too much money, right? Which is interesting. Like, why is that? But maybe it's because, like, I don't know if it's because nobody feels like they have enough money, or if it's because if somebody does feel like they have enough money, at least they can do something about it, right? Like, they can just give it away if they want to, you know?
They could.
Yeah. They could. There's at least that choice. Whereas if you don't have more money, you can't give away the excess that you don't have, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of people struggle to pay their bills and stuff like that. That's
true.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's acknowledge that
Yeah.
difficulty and if you're in that situation, financial struggle, and then you're looking at people that have just an abundance, way more than they need, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's
that is
hard. It's hard to think about that, objectively or in a healthy way.
Yeah, that's really true. So when we're down, you'd say like when there's struggle, it's even more elevated. I think that's fair.
Sure.
Right, because it's more magnified. Like I can see my struggle so much more clearly and more intensely. So yeah, that's fair. But here's what's so hard about that is like we're talking about wealth as if people just assume that it's wrong. But like, is it wrong? It's so tough. Like, is it wrong? But is what wrong? Is wealth wrong? Well, how do you define wealth? It's so complex, And so, but how do we know? Like, how do we determine is wealth wrong or not? Like, how do we figure that out? Or is it up to us?
I mean, I guess my gut reaction to that is it our place? I don't know if it's our place to look at anybody else and say you have too much or nope, you're okay. You're under the amount that, is acceptable or unacceptable or whatever. Yeah, maybe it's not our place. Yeah. Maybe the title of this episode is just totally inappropriate, actually.
It's almost like we choose titles that are just ever so slightly inflammatory.
Yeah.
Now, we would never do something
I believe
like
you
that.
came up with this one.
Did I?
Jeff? Yeah,
Did I
I
actually?
believe so.
Is getting rich bad? Yeah, I think.
Maybe not. I don't know. Who came
I don't
up
know.
with it?
We came up. It's a team effort.
And it's something we think about, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not appropriate for us to make those judgments on somebody else. It is something we think about, and it's not bad to think about, you know. But yeah, I mean, how would you even draw the line on whether it's bad or not, or whether you'd consider it wealthy or not, where that number is?
Well, it's so hard. But people do it all the time. We make these judgment calls on like, that's too much money, or the way they're using their money is wrong, or like, you know, they're not good wealthy people. You know, we do it all the time. And so there's got to be some metric in our mind where we decide that, you know, in a given situation, right?
At least for ourselves. You know, maybe that's what it comes down to, is these are things we need to think about for ourselves.
Yeah. But if I had a ton of money, I would never be one of those bad wealthy people.
Like if you had $5 million?
Yeah, I would never be one of those. Yeah, I mean, you know, but we tell ourselves those things, right? Oh, if I had a ton of money, I'd be the most generous. I'd be, you know, whatever. But wealth changes people though. That's a real thing, right? You know, it changes the way people live. You see like lottery winners, people change the way they live, and it usually ruins their lives, right?
The data is really clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet we still crave it.
Yeah.
We're still like, oh, I got to have more money, you know?
Because like you said, we think it's going to be different for me.
I'm different. I'm not like the rest. Man, I feel like we're being kind of negative right now. I don't think we're trying to be, but I think we're being honest with this situation of humanity, right?
It seems like we've got to own the ways that we're maybe judgmental or critical in ways that we shouldn't be. That's important. But okay, how can we take this in a less critical direction?
Yeah, well, maybe we say, here's a question. Like, if we're going to think about wealth, maybe whether we have a lot or whether we don't. Let's just eliminate the idea of being rich or not. Whatever it is that we have, how do we use that in a good way? How do we, because I think like people often say that like resources magnify who we are, right? Like it kind of makes me think of like Captain America, right? You've seen that? The original one?
Yeah,
where
of
like,
course.
you know, they're trying to find a candidate to like, you know, give him the injection to make him like, and what it's going to do is it's going to magnify all of his traits, right? All of his physical, mental, emotional traits, like they're just going to be more intense. And so they have to find a good guy, right?
Yeah.
And that makes it better. I think resources are like that too a lot of times. Like it magnifies who we are.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And so the question is like, maybe whatever we make right now, right? Anybody who's listening, right? Whether you're listening or, you know, whatever it is, how do we use that the right way? I think that's an important question. How do we use it right now? Not later when I'm making a bunch of money, but like, how do I use that well right now? Maybe that's the question we should be asking.
So maybe if I'm hearing you right, maybe one thing you're saying is you can actually know what kind of person you'd be with millions or billions of dollars. And the way to know that is the way you are with whatever you have right now. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I think so. Which creates, I think what's good about that is well, maybe we don't think about it like that all the time, but I think it creates opportunity, right? Like instead of me having to hope that I get rich so that then I can live this different lifestyle, I can ask myself now, what kind of person do I want to be? Or who should I be? You know, at my core, how do I want to live my life? And then if I end up being affluent or whatever, like then that will translate into that lifestyle, you know? Like then it will just magnify those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's an opportunity, right? Like that's kind of a charge. Like, hey, I think we can step up and be more generous and be more whatever with what we have. And that's a good thing.
So we're not just talking about like finances. We're talking about even backing up and thinking about what we value or what we want to be about as people. And that determines how we think about finances, for instance.
I think so. Would you say that's fair?
Sure.
I'm trying to think about it.
Yeah. It's a bigger issue than just the money issue. So generosity is one of those characteristics that you said is important to think about, right? What else? So generosity is a big part of it. What else?
Man, that's the main one I was thinking about with that. Can you think of something else that would play into it?
Well, another one that came to my mind was gratitude for what we have.
Yeah.
You know, getting back to what you said before, the jealousy factor. It's hard to be jealous when you're grateful. I guess. Those seem almost mutually exclusive to me.
Yeah, I think they are.
Because if you recognize what you do have and you're grateful for it, even if you still have some needs and struggles, it seems like that would really prevent you from looking at somebody else who has more than you and just being envious of them, you know?
Yeah. There's humility that comes with gratitude as well, right? Like, but I think culturally, I think that's something we're all wrestling with is kind of this entitlement. Like, I think we're kind of in a society where it's like so much is like, oh, it's all about you and you've got to feel happy and all this stuff. And I think that's like, I think that's just something we have to fight, you know, because I think that it's not all about us, right? But would you say that's fair? Like that there's like this entitlement that like, if I'm going to live my life, I deserve to have these different commodities and to be happy and stuff. Whereas gratitude is saying, hey, like, you know, there may be things that I want, maybe things that people would say that I deserve, but I'm just grateful that I have these things.
Yeah.
Like that's like, there are some people that don't have these things, right? Living in the US is actually pretty amazing. If you've ever, and I've lived outside of the US for 15 years, and I can tell you, like, people in other countries are like, man, I want to be in the United States because it's different.
Yeah.
You know, and it's better there. And I've seen living in other countries, like, you know, even though I loved being there, I see that mindset shift where people are more grateful in other countries. And here we tend to be really greedy, you know?
That's interesting. I've seen that too, you know, and a lot of you listening probably live in other parts of the world that aren't as affluent. And so you have a more healthy perspective on this. But there are people who grow up in this culture or affluent cultures like this. And it's super helpful to see other parts of the world or even more poverty within the U.S. borders because there's more poverty-stricken areas in our country as well. It is really helpful. If you've just grown up in suburbia with all of your needs met, and that's not a bad thing, that's a blessing. No. But if you've grown up that way, you can just kind of think, yeah, that's just how life works. And maybe that does cultivate a bit of entitlement. And seeing the rest of the world, you know, that's kind of an advantage that you've had, Jeff, like you said, growing up in other places and seeing different lifestyles, you know. That's eye-opening. That's helpful. I mean, I remember as a middle schooler traveling to a more impoverished part of the world and just being like, okay, it did make me more grateful, you know, and less entitled and taking less for granted.
Right. So would you say that then, I mean, you were mentioning gratitude is kind of like this opposite of maybe like this envy that we experience. How do we cultivate that? Or because I think it's a good thing to cultivate gratitude. I mean, if even like science just like backs that up, right? Like the research is pretty clear that people who are grateful, right? We've taught like people, like there's a reason that there's like gratitude journals, right? You know, write down 1,000 things you're thankful for in a year between Thanksgiving to next Thanksgiving. And that's like, it changes the way people think, right?
It does.
And so like...
Yeah, my wife has encouraged me to do that. And I've done it a few years. First year, I was maybe 500 for the year.
Not very thankful.
Not a super grateful person, or at least not good at writing it down. But I have become more aware. I mean, it does. It makes you, when you document, okay, wait, I'm going to pause and I'm going to think about things that I'm very thankful for. It does change you. Yeah, changes your mindset.
Yeah. So getting back to the original question, right? The title of the episode is Getting Rich Bad. What would you say? What would you say to that? Just answering that question just directly.
I would say maybe I'd rephrase it to misusing your resources is bad. Right?
Yeah.
That could be a very wealthy person or not super wealthy.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'll add something else back to the negativity just a little bit and the criticism.
All right, here we go.
Okay. You know, a lot of people, the reason that and this is not everybody, okay? This is just certain situations. Sometimes we have financial struggles because we haven't been very wise, right? Maybe we've gotten ourselves into debt. Maybe we've tried to have a more comfortable or luxurious lifestyle than we can afford, and so we just haven't made very wise decisions. And if that's the case, you know, we need to own it. We need to own that rather than be envious or critical of people who have more than us. We need to recognize, okay, not only do I need to be generous to whatever extent I can. Not only do I need to be grateful for what I have, but I need to be wise with how I use what I have. So that's important too.
That's really good advice, because it like, yeah, a lot of times we want to push off the responsibility of our own decisions. And I think it's really bad for us,
Right.
you know? In fact, I think there's like something really empowering about being like, no, this is my decision. I'm making this decision for me. And when we own it, it's like, okay, I can fix this, right? I can change this part of me, or I can make a different decision next time. And we can, in a way, we can help improve the way we live by making better decisions. And I think there's something really empowering about that, and I think people are missing out. When people say that it's somebody else's fault out there and it's not like I have no control, I think that's really just I think we cut ourselves off at the knees, We totally give ourselves no chance to grow. And growth is really important, Like, we need to be able to grow through those things and recognize mistakes. But that takes some humility, right? Going back to humility and gratitude. And being honest with ourselves. And that's hard. But I think it's worth it.
Yeah. Hard, but very rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think if we have that humility and we acknowledge that, or if we don't, blaming other people or just being envious of other people is a sure way to just be a bitter, unhappy person. So if that's what you're going for, then cultivate that envy.
Yeah, for sure.
But if not, man, we gotta stop just looking at other people with that jealousy or that sense of entitlement or resentment or whatever, because it just it sucks the life out of you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And so I think of like when we think of like, to me, the way I like to think about it is like, at my core, right, who I am, and when I think about myself, what kind of person do I want to be? And so I think what you said was really good. Like, hey, if I want to be an envious and greedy, miserable person, well, yeah, then I'll choose to be like that. And I'll choose to blame other people for my problems, and I'll choose all this stuff. Sometimes something does happen to us that is out of our control, but a lot of times it's our decision. And also, that happened to us. And so what are we going to do next, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, is it Rafiki in The Lion King, where like he like hits Simba on the head, and he's like, what'd you do that for? He's like, it doesn't matter. It's in the past. He's like, what matters is how you go forward, right? And I think it's that too. Like, stuff is just going to happen to us. How do we choose to go forward? How do we make decisions to hopefully improve or work through whatever it is? Because we can't change what's happened. We can only change what happens going forward.
Yeah, that's where the choice is, isn't it?
Right.
Choice is not always in the circumstances, but certainly how we decide to think about and respond to the circumstances. Yeah, that's in our control. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like it's not, right? Because our emotions or our reactivity is just propelling us in a certain direction. But we got to pause and realize, I do get to choose how I'm going to respond to this.
So if we want to be more joyful people, I think it starts with gratitude and humility. Recognizing like, hey, I'm grateful for what I actually do have, instead of always thinking about what we don't have. That's a big deal. It changes our whole mindset.
It is. And maybe it sounds cliche, but
I think it does sound cliche.
It is crucial.
Yeah.
And it is a choice.
Well, and a lot of things that are cliche for a reason, right? Because a lot of things that are cliche are actually pretty true.
Right.
Not all the time, but certainly often.
Yeah. Getting at something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Jamie, all right, as we think about this, we're getting low on time. As we think about this idea, we always want to bring it back to, what does God's word say? What does the Bible say about wealth and how we think about it? What do you think? What does the Bible have to say about, wealth and money and just all of that subject we've been tackling?
Yeah. Well, money is the root of all evil. That is not actually in the Bible.
That's a lie. That's a misquote.
It's the love of money. So it's like being obsessed with or overly focused on or dependent on money. That's the root of all kinds of evil. That's what that passage of Scripture actually says. It's the first letter from the Apostle Paul to Timothy, the guy he was mentoring. And in chapter 6 of that letter, there's all kinds of things about wealth that are very helpful. One of the things that's emphasized in that chapter is contentment. If our basic needs are met, let's be content and enjoy life rather than just wanting more, like we've been talking about.
Right.
another thing that's emphasized in that chapter is if you do have wealth, and wealth is not said to be wrong in that chapter, but if you do have wealth, you are susceptible to some things.
Right.
You're susceptible to keeping it to yourself, not being generous. You're susceptible to depending on your wealth instead of on God, who's the one who actually provides for us, and things like that. So you're sometimes you can feel superior, like, oh, okay, I'm wealthier than these people. That must mean that I worked harder and am more deserving of it than them, and therefore I'm a superior person. Right. Now, there is something to work ethic and valuing that,
of course,
and but that sense of superiority, the Bible warns against that.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think you're totally on point there. Those things are really important. One thing I would add in there too is the Bible is really clear about how we take care of our money or the things that we have, right? The idea of stewardship, if you've heard that term, very important, right? How are we using what we have? Are we using it to benefit people, or, like in Scripture, you hear they talk about landowners or different people abusing people with their wealth, right? Like not taking care of others and making, using it in a corrupt way, basically using it for power and to hurt other people or keep them down. I think that's wrong, and the Bible is pretty clear about that, how it affects people is important. And so I think whether we have a lot or whether we have a little or what feels like a little, how we use it is still really important, no matter what we have, and that includes our time, right? Like our money, our time, all of that, I would say falls into that wealth category. And I think it's the question is how we use it. Do we use it selfishly for just me, how I spend my time, how I spend my money, or am I using it to also care for others, even if it's a little bit, right? What is it in 1 Corinthians I'm thinking of that talks about like God loves a cheerful giver? Is that what I'm thinking of? We used to have a little cardboard plaque that my dad made growing up. If any of my family is listening to this, they'll know what I'm talking about. And it shows a guy who's really nervous and sweating, is classic my dad drawing. And there's a penny stuck to glued onto this board, and there's a little thumb, and he's holding it, and he's nervous about putting this money, giving this money away, because in the imagery, even that little bit is important to him, right? He feels like it's a lot, but if he's cheerfully giving it, that's honoring to God, And so there's something about trust of being generous. If I give everything that I have away, some would say that's foolish, but if it's in a way of honoring God and being faithful, if you feel like that's what He's called you to do, I think God honors that, and He's going to take care of us. He promises that He will. So we can trust that it's going to be okay. So I think those two things are something I think about.
That's really good. When you're talking about stewardship too, it made me think about that term, because a steward is somebody who's taking care of somebody else's stuff, right? And so the concept is what we have, it's not actually ours, it's God's, and He's given us the opportunity to use it. And that just changes your whole perspective, doesn't it? I'm not my own person even. My house is not mine, my wealth is not mine, my time is not mine, my body is not even mine. Jesus bought all of that with His blood. If my faith is in Him, and I belong to Him, and all of that belongs to Him. Yeah. And that's what stewardship is. So that just changes the whole mindset, doesn't it?
Right. In a way, then it goes back to, I'm just grateful for what I have because He's given it to me.
Yeah, there you go.
It all belongs to God. And if He's given me something to take care of, I'm just going to be grateful.
Yep. What a free way to live.
Yeah, it's great because we can trust Him that He's the one in control, not me. Well, Jamie, final thoughts, just kind of big picture conclusions as we wrap up today.
What stood out to me is how easily we get resentful, and just how toxic that is in our own hearts and minds. So identifying that and choosing a different way, that's what stands out to me.
Yeah, I agree. Tied into that, I think that choosing how we're going to be, choosing to be grateful and choosing to not compare, right? But actually see what we have and say, God, thank you for what I do have. And that's a gift from you. And that change, I think the mindset is so big here, and the humility that comes into it. So I think those two things are great, some great conclusions. So
yeah, the mindset does seem more important than the amount of wealth that you have or don't have, doesn't it?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today on Deepish Thoughts. We're going to come back next week with some more content. So hopefully you can join us for that. So go follow us on social media, all the normal places. And we'll see you guys next week.